He ordered a bride, but his first wife, the one he fled from, stepped out of the wagon. Thomas woke before the sun that morning. The village was still quiet, and the only sounds were the faint crow of a rooster and the wind moving through the dry grass. He had been thinking for weeks, even months, about leaving. Every step he had taken in his life seemed to push him toward this one moment. He knew that staying in the village meant returning to a life he could not live, trapped in obligations, and a marriage that had grown cold long before it had begun. His first wife, Mary, had once seemed kind and full of life, but over time, the warmth had faded. Every argument, every misunderstanding, and every harsh word had built a wall between them, a wall that Thomas now feared he could never break. He packed only what he could carry: a small bag with a few clothes, a pocket knife, a journal, and some coins he had saved secretly. Each item represented more than just its usefulness. Each was a symbol of hope, a reminder that he could start again. As he worked quietly, careful not to wake anyone, he thought of the path ahead. The road would be long and difficult. There would be towns he had never visited, strangers he would have to meet, and nights when he would sleep under the open sky. But in his heart, Thomas felt that he had no choice. To stay meant misery, but to leave offered a chance, however small, for freedom. When he stepped outside, the village looked different in the early light. The houses, which had always felt like a cage, now seemed like a distant memory. Smoke rose from chimneys and the sound of livestock filled the air, but none of it touched him. He walked quickly toward the edge of the village, his bag slung over his shoulder, glancing back only once. He knew that once he left, there was no returning, at least not in the same way. Every step on the dusty road was both terrifying and liberating. As Thomas moved further from the village, memories of Mary came unbidden. He remembered the first day they had met, how she had smiled politely, and how he had felt a mix of hope and nervousness. Over time, those early feelings had faded, replaced by tension, silence, and the small, sharp arguments that seemed to come from nowhere. Mary had her own struggles and he had his. Neither had truly understood the other, and pride had kept them from trying harder. Thomas felt a pang of guilt as he remembered how he sometimes wished she would leave, only to feel shame for those thoughts. He knew leaving her now might hurt her more than anything else, but he also knew he could not stay in a life that crushed his spirit. The road led him into open fields. The sun was rising higher, painting the grass gold, and the breeze carried the scent of wildflowers. For the first time in months, Thomas felt a strange lightness. He walked faster, imagining the life ahead. In his mind, he could see a small house in a distant town, a garden he would tend himself, and perhaps a companion who would understand him. He had heard of a way to order a bride through letters and intermediaries, a process that seemed unusual but promising. The idea of meeting someone new, someone who had chosen him as much as he had chosen them, filled him with cautious hope. Yet even as he walked, he knew the road would not be simple. He had to travel alone, with no clear map, relying on his instincts and whatever kindness strangers might offer. There were rivers to cross, hills to climb, and nights when the cold would make him shiver despite all his clothing. He thought of the wagon he would eventually need to reach towns faster and wondered if he could find work along the way to pay for it. Thomas had learned to be practical, and he knew that hope alone would not carry him to freedom. He stopped by a small stream to rest and drink. The water was clear and cold, and as he knelt, he watched his reflection ripple in the moving current. He barely recognized the face staring back at him. The man in the reflection looked tired, anxious, but also determined. Thomas touched his face, feeling the weight of the decision he had made. This journey was not just about escaping Mary or the village. It was about finding himself, discovering who he could be when not bound by fear or expectation. As he continued walking, Thomas noticed small signs of life along the way. A fox darting into the brush, birds singing from the trees, and the distant sound of a cart on a far road. Each sound reminded him that life moved on, no matter where he was, and that perhaps he could too. He thought about what he would tell Mary if he could speak honestly. He might say that he needed to leave not because he did not care, but because staying would destroy him and perhaps them both. He might hope she could understand one day. Night fell slowly, and Thomas set up a small camp beside an old oak tree. He started a fire and sat near it, watching the flames dance and listening to the quiet rustling of leaves. The stars appeared, countless and bright, and for a moment he felt small but in a comforting way. The world was vast and he was only one man, yet he had taken the first step toward freedom. That thought warmed him more than the fire ever could. Thomas wrote in his journal by the light of the fire, describing the journey, his thoughts, and his dreams. He did not hide his fear, nor did he try to make the journey seem easier than it was. He wrote about Mary, about the village, about the life he hoped to create somewhere far away. The act of writing gave him clarity. He realized that running was not simply about escape, it was about choice. He could choose the life he wanted, even if it meant facing uncertainty and hardship. Sleep came slowly, as his mind replayed years of memories, small arguments, unspoken words, and lost opportunities. Yet, even in the darkness, he felt a faint spark of hope. Tomorrow he would continue toward the next town. There, he would begin the process of finding a new life, someone new, and perhaps a sense of peace he had not known in years. When dawn arrived, Thomas packed up again, feeling the ache in his muscles and the soreness of his feet, but also a renewed sense of purpose. He walked through fields, past streams, and along winding roads, always moving forward. Along the way, he encountered farmers returning from their morning work, travelers on carts, and children running barefoot in the fields. Each interaction reminded him of life's simplicity and resilience. In one small village, Thomas paused to eat bread and cheese he had carried. A kind woman offered him water and a smile. Though they spoke only briefly, her kindness gave him comfort. He realized that while the road was long and uncertain, there were small moments of generosity that made it bearable. Each day brought challenges, but also possibilities. By the end of the first week, Thomas had traveled many miles. His body ached, his clothes were dusty, and his bag felt heavier than when he had started. Yet his heart was lighter than it had been in years. He felt a sense of accomplishment for leaving the life that had suffocated him and for taking control of his destiny. He thought again about ordering a bride. The idea was not a solution to all problems, but a symbol of hope. It represented a chance for companionship without fear, for love that was chosen rather than forced, and for a life built on understanding and care. He knew that such a step required patience, planning, and courage, but for the first time, the idea did not feel impossible. It felt necessary. As Thomas lay down that night under the stars, he whispered a silent promise to himself. He would continue forward, no matter the obstacles. He would not turn back, but he would not forget the lessons of the past. He would move carefully, act with honesty, and prepare for the life he hoped to create. And though Mary's face lingered in his thoughts, he knew that this journey was about him finding peace, freedom, and eventually a chance at happiness he had never known. With the fire dying down and the night air cold against his skin, Thomas finally slept, wrapped in a blanket of courage and quiet hope. The road ahead was long, but he had taken the first step, and that first step, he realized, was everything. Thomas walked into the next town with a mixture of hope and nervousness. The streets were busier here than in his village, with carts moving slowly along the dirt roads, merchants calling out the prices of their goods, and children running in groups, laughing. He paused for a moment, taking it all in. Everything felt bigger, louder, and more alive than the quiet village he had left behind. Yet, the bustling town did not overwhelm him. It gave him a sense of purpose. This was the place where his new life could begin. He had heard of a service that helped people find companions, a system where letters and intermediaries arranged matches for those who were ready to start again. It seemed unusual, and Thomas knew some might judge it, but he did not care. What mattered was the chance to find someone who could share his life with honesty and kindness, someone who had chosen him as much as he had chosen them. The office where he was to make the arrangements was small, tucked between a bakery and a general store. The scent of fresh bread mixed with dust and horse manure in the street, but Thomas barely noticed. Inside, a woman in her 50s sat behind a wooden desk, her hair tied neatly and her eyes sharp and assessing. She smiled when Thomas entered, though the lines on her face suggested she had seen much in her years. "Good morning," she said. "You are Thomas, I presume. I have received your letter." Thomas nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. The reality of what he was doing pressed on him now more than ever. "Yes," he said, I am ready to begin." She gestured for him to sit and handed him a form. "We will need some details. Your age, your occupation, your hopes for a companion. Please answer honestly. This is not a game. The right match can change your life." Thomas spent time writing carefully. He did not exaggerate his life or his hopes. He wrote that he wanted honesty, kindness, and someone who would understand the struggles he had faced. He did not hide the pain he carried from his first marriage, though he described it briefly and without bitterness. Writing it all down made it feel more real. He was no longer just fleeing his past. He was planning a life with intention. When he finished, the woman smiled again. "I have someone in mind," she said. "Her name is Elena. She lives in a town several days' travel from here. She has written letters expressing her own desire to find a partner. She is kind, gentle, and curious about life. I believe you may be compatible." Thomas felt a flicker of hope. Elena. Even her name sounded calm and promising. He asked questions about her interests, her work, her family. The woman answered patiently, giving him a picture of a woman who, like him, wanted a life beyond the ordinary, someone who wanted to build rather than merely exist. "We can arrange for her to join you here," the woman said. "It will take time. Travel is not easy and you must prepare. But if you are patient, she will come and you will meet her properly. You will see if she is the companion you seek." Thomas nodded, trying to contain his excitement. He felt a strange mix of fear and anticipation. Meeting someone new, especially in such unusual circumstances, was daunting, but it was also thrilling. For the first time in years, he could imagine waking each day with hope rather than anxiety. Over the next few days, Thomas prepared for her arrival. He found a small room in an inn and kept it clean and simple, making sure it was comfortable and welcoming. He bought food and supplies for the journey she would have to take to reach him. Each small act felt like laying the foundation of a new life. He even practiced conversations, imagining what it would be like to speak to her for the first time. His heart raced at the thought, and yet he felt calm in a way he had not felt for years. Letters were exchanged through intermediaries. Thomas wrote carefully, expressing his hopes without being overly forward. Elena responded with patience and thoughtfulness. Her words showed curiosity about him, questions about his life, and a gentle humor that made him smile more than once. Even through paper and ink, Thomas felt a connection forming. He realized that this connection, unlike anything he had experienced with Mary, was built slowly, with choice and consent, not obligation. During these days, Thomas walked the town streets often, observing the life around him. He watched children play, merchants negotiate, and travelers rest before continuing their journeys. He thought about the life he had left behind and how different things could be now. The memory of Mary came occasionally, but it was quieter than before, replaced by a vision of what could be. He allowed himself to dream, imagining mornings where he could drink tea with Elena, work in a small garden, and speak freely without fear of judgment or argument. He also considered the journey she would take. The roads could be dangerous, especially for someone unfamiliar with travel. He thought about rivers to cross, forests where wolves might lurk, and towns where strangers might not be kind. He worried for her safety, and the thought of her weary journey made him more determined to prepare everything perfectly. He wanted her to feel welcome, safe, and respected, not simply relieved that the journey was over. Finally, the day came when word arrived that she had begun her travel. Thomas went to the edge of town to meet the wagon that would bring her closer. His hands shook slightly as he waited. The dust of the road swirled in the wind, and the sound of hooves echoed in the distance. Thomas' heart beat faster. He wondered what she would look like, what she would say first, and if they would feel a true connection when they finally met. The wagon appeared over the hill, creaking under the weight of its passengers and supplies. Thomas stepped forward, trying to calm his nerves. The woman inside leaned forward slightly, and Thomas caught his first glimpse. She looked tired from the journey, but there was a softness in her eyes, a quiet curiosity that matched what he had imagined from her letters. Eleanor had chosen to come, and that alone filled Thomas with respect and admiration. As the wagon stopped, Thomas extended his hand and she took it gently. Words came slowly at first, awkward and careful, but soon their conversation grew more natural. They spoke of the journey, of the towns they had passed, and of small details of their lives. Each word built a bridge between them, a connection grounded in understanding and patience. Thomas felt a warmth in his chest, a feeling he had not experienced for many years. It was not love yet, perhaps, but it was the beginning of something real. During the ride back into town, they continued talking, sharing stories of their childhoods, their hopes, and their fears. Thomas listened as she spoke of her own struggles, her family, and her desire for a life where she could be heard and respected. He realized that they shared more than he had first imagined. Both had endured hardship and isolation, and both now sought a partnership based on trust and mutual care. As night fell, they reached the inn where Thomas had prepared her room. He showed her the small space, with its simple furnishings and warm fire. Eleanor's eyes softened as she looked around, and Thomas felt a sense of pride and relief. He had done his best to make her feel welcome, and she had responded with gratitude and gentle smiles. Over dinner, they spoke more openly. Eleanor asked questions about his life in the village, about his work, and even about the journey he had taken to reach this town. Thomas answered honestly, sharing both his fears and his hopes. He spoke of Mary only briefly, describing the life he had left behind without bitterness, and Eleanor nodded with understanding. She did not judge, she did not question, she simply listened. That listening itself was a gift, a sign that this new life could be built on honesty and respect. Later, Thomas walked outside to the quiet streets. The night was cool, the air filled with the scent of pine and the faint smoke of evening fires. He paused and looked up at the stars, feeling a strange calm. The journey ahead would not be easy, he knew. Life never was, but now he felt that he had taken the first real step toward something better. He had chosen hope over fear, honesty over avoidance, and possibility over resignation. He thought about the future with Eleanor, imagining mornings where they could work side by side, evenings spent in conversation, and days filled with small, shared joys. It was not a perfect life. There would be challenges, misunderstandings, and difficult decisions, but it would be theirs. For the first time, Thomas allowed himself to believe that happiness could be a choice, not just a dream. As he returned to the inn, Thomas felt the weight of the day lift slightly. He had faced his fears, made the arrangements, and welcomed someone new into his life. Eleanor, in her quiet strength and curiosity, had already begun to change his world. Together, they would face the coming days, the journey ahead, and the life they hoped to build. And though shadows of the past lingered faintly at the edges of his thoughts, Thomas knew that this chapter was different. This chapter was chosen, deliberate, and full of potential. Thomas woke early that morning, the town still quiet, and the streets only beginning to stir. The wagon that would bring Alina closer had been delayed the previous night, and today he expected her arrival. He dressed quickly, his stomach twisting with a mix of nerves and excitement. Each step he took outside the inn made his heart beat faster. Today, the life he had planned for himself might finally begin, or it could be more complicated than he imagined. He walked to the edge of the town, standing near the road where travelers often passed. The sun was still low, casting long shadows across the dusty streets. He scanned every approaching cart, every wagon, hoping to see the familiar form of Alina. Hours passed slowly, the tension in his chest growing heavier. He paced back and forth, his mind racing with questions and thoughts. What if she did not like him? What if the letters had created expectations he could not meet? What if then, in the distance, a wagon appeared? The familiar creak of wheels on uneven road and the sound of hooves echoed across the fields. Thomas stepped forward, his heart pounding. He squinted through the morning haze, trying to see the figure inside. A woman leaned forward slightly, her head turned as if scanning for someone. His pulse quickened. It was her, Alina. But then something strange caught his eye. Another figure stepped out of the wagon, a familiar shape he did not expect to see. His stomach dropped. He blinked, thinking his eyes were deceiving him, but no, it was her, Mary. His first wife, the very person he had fled months ago, was stepping out of the wagon with a determined expression. Thomas froze. The wagon rocked slightly as the driver slowed, unsure of what to do with the sudden appearance of two women he had not expected. Thomas' mind raced. How had she found him? Why was she here now? His chest tightened, and for a moment he could not speak. The world seemed to stop around him. Dust swirled in the wind, birds flew overhead, and Thomas stood frozen in shock. Mary's eyes met his from across the wagon. She had changed since he had last seen her. Her hair was tied back, her face weathered slightly by the road, but her gaze was as sharp and unwavering as ever. She walked toward him with purpose, each step deliberate. Thomas wanted to call out, to explain, to beg her to turn back, but no words came. He felt caught between relief, fear, and guilt, all at once. Alina, sitting quietly in the wagon, looked confused. She had expected to meet a man she had written to, someone who had shared her hopes and fears in letters. She had not expected the sudden appearance of a woman who clearly knew him, whose eyes carried a story of their own. Alina's hand gripped the edge of the wagon for support, and Thomas felt a wave of embarrassment and panic. He had imagined a simple, quiet introduction. Instead, life had thrown him into chaos. Mary stopped a few steps away, her gaze steady and calm. "Thomas," she said softly but firmly. Her voice carried the weight of months of pain, loneliness, and unanswered questions. "We need to talk." Thomas swallowed hard. He wanted to respond, to explain why he had left, to justify his actions, but the words felt heavy and inadequate. All he could do was nod. "Mary, she raised a hand gently. "Not now. We will speak where it is quiet." She looked at Alina, who was still seated in the wagon. "I do not wish to hurt anyone, but this cannot wait." Alina nodded slowly, understanding that this was a situation far beyond what she had imagined. She stepped down from the wagon, careful and calm, showing a grace that impressed Thomas despite his inner turmoil. Her presence added both tension and balance to the scene. The three of them walked a short distance away from the wagon and the driver, the silence heavy between them. Thomas could feel his own heart pounding. He had spent months planning a new life, arranging a new beginning, and yet here was the past, standing in front of him with the same intensity he had hoped to leave behind. Mary spoke first. "Thomas, why did you leave?" "Was I not enough?" Her voice was not angry, but it carried a quiet pain that cut through him. Thomas struggled to meet her eyes. He had no simple answer. His heart wanted to defend himself, to explain, but he also knew that excuses would not heal the wounds of the past. I could not stay," he said finally, his voice trembling. "It was not because of you alone, Mary. It was everything, the life, the expectations. I felt trapped, and I did not know another way." Mary looked at him for a long moment, her eyes softening slightly but still serious. "I understand that you felt trapped," she said, "but running does not solve anything. You left without speaking, without trying. And now here we are. What am I supposed to think?" Thomas felt a lump in his throat. He had imagined this moment countless times, but never like this. He had not expected her to find him, to come after him, and to confront him so directly. The reality was overwhelming. He realized that the past, no matter how far he ran, would always have a way of catching up. Alina stood quietly, listening. She had only just met Thomas in person, and now the story of his past was unfolding before her eyes. She could see the conflict in his expression, the shame, the fear, and the guilt. Yet she also saw the man who had taken responsibility for building a new life, a man who was trying, however imperfectly, to face the consequences of his actions. Mary's voice broke the silence again. "Thomas, do you intend to start a new life with someone else while leaving everything behind? While leaving me behind?" Thomas shook his head quickly. "No, I wanted to start fresh, but I did not know how to handle what was left unresolved. I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted a chance to breathe, to live honestly. I did not think running would hurt you so much, but I see now that it has." Mary's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You think this is only about you?" she asked softly. "Your leaving affected me in ways you cannot imagine. I have worried, suffered, and wondered if I did something wrong. And now, to see you with another woman, it is complicated. But I cannot pretend I do not care, Thomas. I cannot pretend that I do not hope you find happiness, even if that happiness is not with me." Thomas felt a mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief that Mary had not come with anger, sorrow for the pain he had caused. Alina moved closer, her presence calm and reassuring, yet respectful of the space between Thomas and Mary. "Mary," Thomas said quietly, "I want to be honest with both of you. I cannot undo the past, but I can try to move forward carefully. I need to understand how we can face this moment without hurting anyone more than necessary." Mary nodded slowly. "I do not know what the future holds," she admitted. "I came here to speak to you, to understand, and perhaps to find closure. I do not wish to stop you from finding happiness, Thomas. But I need to know that you are aware of what leaving me has meant, and that you will not simply run again." Thomas felt the weight of her words. He realized that freedom was not merely escaping. It was facing life honestly, acknowledging the consequences of his actions, and taking responsibility. He had wanted to flee from pain, but now he saw that true courage meant standing in the middle of it, even when it was uncomfortable or frightening. Alina finally spoke, her voice gentle but steady. "Thomas has shared his story with me, and I understand the difficulties he has faced. But this is more complicated than I expected. I am willing to be patient, to wait and see how things unfold. I only ask that honesty guide every step. We cannot pretend the past does not exist, but we can choose how to face it." Thomas looked at both women, feeling the enormity of the moment. Here was Mary, the life he had fled, standing strong yet vulnerable. Here was Alina, the hope of a new beginning, patient and understanding. Both were connected to him in different ways, and he realized that his choices now would shape not only his future but the lives of both women. Mary sighed and stepped back slightly. "Perhaps this is not the place to decide everything. Let us talk more calmly, somewhere quiet where we can speak without pressure." Thomas nodded, grateful for the suggestion. Alina agreed, and together they found a quiet path away from the wagon and the travelers. As they walked, Thomas reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He had run to escape, planned a new life, and welcomed someone new into his heart. Yet life had reminded him that the past is never far away. It cannot simply be left behind. It must be faced, understood, and when possible, reconciled. By the time they reached a secluded spot, The air was filled with the sound of wind through the trees and the distant calls of birds. Thomas knew that the conversation ahead would be difficult, but it was necessary. For the first time, he felt ready to confront the past, to speak honestly, and to begin a life where truth, care, and responsibility guided his choices. And though uncertainty remained, Thomas also felt a spark of hope. Life was complicated, full of unexpected turns, but it was also full of possibility. The challenge now was not to run, but to choose, with honesty and courage, how to move forward. Thomas led Mary and Alina to a small clearing beside the road. The morning sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting gentle patterns on the ground. The air was still, carrying the faint scent of grass and earth. Thomas took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past and the possibilities of the future pressing on him. He knew this conversation could shape not just his life, but the lives of both women as well. He began quietly, choosing his words carefully. "Mary, Alina, I want to speak honestly. I cannot undo what has happened. I left, and that caused pain. I tried to start anew, hoping for a better life. But the truth is, I cannot ignore the past, nor can I pretend it does not exist." Mary's eyes softened slightly, though they still carried a mix of hurt and expectation. Alina nodded, her hands folded calmly in her lap, her gaze steady. Thomas continued, "Mary, I have thought about you every day since I left. I know I hurt you, and for that I am truly sorry. I ran because I felt trapped, not because I did not care. I now realize that running does not solve anything. I understand that freedom is not just leaving, it is facing life honestly." Mary's lips pressed together, and she looked down for a moment before meeting his eyes again. "Thomas, it is true, leaving hurt me more than words can describe, but I also understand that we were both struggling. I may never fully understand why you left, but I am willing to listen if you are willing to speak honestly." Thomas nodded. "I am willing. And I am willing to accept the consequences of my choices. I want to find a path that respects both of you and allows each of us to move forward without fear or resentment." Alina spoke next, her voice gentle. "I have just met Thomas in person, and I see the challenges he has faced. I understand the past is not simple. I am willing to be patient, to allow things to unfold naturally. I want honesty above all. If we speak openly, perhaps we can all find a way to move forward." The three of them sat in silence for a few moments, the sound of the wind through the trees filling the space. Thomas felt the tension in his chest slowly ease, replaced by a sense of clarity. He realized that running from life or making choices in fear would never bring peace. Peace came from understanding, from facing mistakes, and from making thoughtful decisions. He turned to Mary. "I do not expect things to go back to the way they were. I know that we cannot return to the past, but I hope we can find a way to forgive and respect each other. I do not wish to cause you further pain, but I also cannot ignore the chance for a new life." Mary looked thoughtful. "I do not know what the future holds, but I am willing to let go of anger, Thomas. I cannot promise I will forget, but I can promise to speak honestly and to respect your choices if you are honest with me. That is all anyone can ask." Thomas felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had expected anger, confrontation, perhaps even rejection, but instead he saw a willingness to understand and communicate. It was not perfect, but it was a beginning. He turned to Alina. "Alina, I cannot ask you to forget the past either. What has happened with Mary affects me, and it may affect our relationship, but I want to move forward honestly. If you are willing, I want to build a life with you based on trust, understanding, and care. No illusions, no hiding from the truth, just honesty." Alina smiled faintly. "I want that too. I came here hoping for a new life, but I understand that life is never simple. I am willing to face reality, to take things step by step, and to see what can grow from honesty and care. I do not want to rush or pretend that everything is easy, but I do want to try." Thomas felt a sense of relief and hope he had not experienced in years. The tension of the past months, the fear of confrontation, and the uncertainty of the future had all weighed heavily on him. Now, in the quiet morning, surrounded by the two women who were central to his life, he realized that he could face the challenges ahead with courage. Mary spoke again, her tone soft but firm. "I cannot stay here forever, Thomas. I came to speak with you to understand and perhaps to find closure. I may decide to return home soon, but before I leave, I want to make sure that you are honest and that Alina is aware of everything. Life is too short for secrets or misunderstandings." Thomas nodded. "You are right. Everything will be open and nothing will be hidden. I want both of you to make choices freely, knowing the truth. That is the only way we can all move forward with respect and care." Alina looked at him, her eyes calm and trusting. "I appreciate that. Honesty is the most important thing. I am willing to wait to understand and to see how things develop. I will not force anything, and I hope you will not either." Thomas felt a deep sense of gratitude toward both women. He realized that life was full of challenges, but it was also full of opportunities for understanding and growth. The past could not be changed, but the present could be shaped with care and honesty. He had run from fear, but now he was choosing to face reality, and that choice felt stronger than any escape. The morning passed with quiet conversation, sharing stories of their lives, their hopes, and their fears. Mary spoke of her struggles while he was gone, of loneliness and uncertainty, but also of resilience and self-discovery. Alina spoke of her dreams, of her hopes for companionship, and of her willingness to understand the complexities of life. Each word, each story, wove a tapestry of connection that was honest, real, and full of potential. Thomas realized that life could not be neatly planned. The past, the present, and the future were all intertwined, and every choice carried consequences. Yet he also realized that understanding, patience, and honesty could guide those choices, allowing life to grow in unexpected and beautiful ways. As the sun climbed higher, Thomas felt a sense of calm determination. He would not run again. He would face challenges, speak honestly, and act with care. He knew that the road ahead might be difficult, but he was ready. He would honor both Mary's courage and Alina's patience, and he would strive to live a life guided by respect, honesty, and love. Mary finally stood, brushing the dust from her dress. "I think it is time for me to move on," she said softly. "I cannot stay here indefinitely, but I leave knowing that you are aware of your responsibilities, Thomas. That is enough for me." Thomas nodded, feeling a mixture of sadness and relief. He had hoped for reconciliation, but he also understood that true resolution often required letting go. Mary's presence had reminded him of the past, of mistakes and pain, but also of courage and honesty. Her decision to leave with dignity gave him a sense of closure he had not expected. Alina turned to him with a gentle smile. "Are you ready?" she asked. Thomas took her hand, feeling the warmth and reassurance of her trust. He nodded. "Yes. I am ready to build a life with honesty and care, step by step." Together, they walked back toward the town, toward the wagon that would carry them to the next chapter of their lives. Thomas felt the weight of fear and uncertainty lift from his shoulders. He knew that challenges would come, but he also knew that he could face them with honesty, patience, and care. As they traveled, Thomas reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He had fled from fear, arranged a new life, and confronted the past in ways he had never imagined. He had learned that running did not bring freedom, but understanding and courage did. He had learned that honesty, even when difficult, could create connection and hope. The road stretched out before them, winding through fields, forests, and hills. Thomas felt the sun on his face and the wind in his hair. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of true possibility. Life was not perfect, and the past would always linger, but he had chosen a path guided by care, respect, and honesty. Mary's figure receded in the distance as she returned to her own life, and Thomas knew that both he and Alina would carry her courage and resilience with them. The journey ahead would not always be easy, but it would be real, and it would be their own. As the wagon moved forward, Thomas looked at Alina and smiled. She returned it, her eyes full of understanding and quiet hope. Together, they faced the future with patience, care, and a commitment to honesty. And though life would continue to bring unexpected challenges, Thomas knew that he would no longer run. He would face whatever came with courage, guided by the lessons of the past and the possibilities of the future. And for the first time in a long time, Thomas felt at peace.